It's a tremendous honor to the President would place his confidence in me in a position of such importance. It's also a tremendous responsibility, and the job of the Secretary of State is to execute on the foreign policy set by the elected President of the United States, and I hope to have the opportunity to do it if my current colleagues here in the U.S. Senate confirm me.
I know that you said that you've brought up the American hostages in every negotiation, and I think we all thank you for that. But for the families of Americans who are missing or detained in Iran, such as that of my constituent Robert Levinson, this deal has brought no new information regarding their loved ones' whereabouts. This deal does nothing for Washington Post reporter Jason Rezaian, whose brother Ali is with us here in this room today. In fact, you personally met and negotiated with an Iranian official who, when pressed on Jason's case, lied to the world. He lied to the world by saying, "We don't jail people for their opinions." This deal does nothing for Marine Corps Sergeant Amir Hekmati, who dictated a letter from Evin prison that said, quote, "Secretary Kerry sits politely with the Iranians, shaking hands and offering large economic concessions to save them from economic meltdown," unquote, as Iran adds hostages. It does nothing for Pastor Saeed Abedini, whose only crime was practicing his religion. In fact, the only people this deal does anything for directly are the Iranian officials who want to continue to jail and execute their people, who hate Israel and seek to wipe the Jewish state and its people from the face of the planet, who want to spread mayhem throughout the Middle East and continue to help Assad slaughter the Syrian people and perhaps kill some Americans and Israelis while they're at it.
On Venezuela, I'm sure you're well aware that Maduro has repeatedly, over the course of the last 5 to 7 years, utilized negotiations as a delay tactic. It's so egregious that even the Vatican says we're not having any more negotiations. In fact, in a very strongly worded letter from the Pope to him said, "You remember the last time we met," I'm paraphrasing, "remember the last time we met, you agreed to things, you never did any of them, there's no purpose in meeting anymore." Effort after effort to negotiate with Maduro's regime for whatever have all resulted in nothing. He uses it to buy time and to delay, and he uses it to divide the opposition. And unfortunately, multiple players have fallen into that trap. The reality of it is that he will agree to all sorts of short-term reversible things, release a political prisoner or what have you. But at the end of the day, he's not ever going to agree to free and fair elections because he can't win them. Is it your view that that our stance towards Venezuela should change, in essence, that we should no longer recognize Juan Guaido and enter into negotiations with Maduro? Yeah, and I would just encourage that every time we talk about issues like Venezuela, that it's important we point to the direct national interest of the United States in the matter, because I think sometimes people start to get the imagery that this is about nation building or picking sides in an internal dispute. The reason why the U.S. cares about we care about democracy, we care a lot about human rights, but there is a direct national interest to the United States involved. You have a regime that openly houses and gives safe harbor to multiple terrorist organizations like the FARC and the ELN that traffic drugs, that in turn threaten to destabilize and even potentially topple at some point or seriously threaten the government of Colombia, which would be a massive blow to regional stability and ultimately impacts us as well. It's already having a migratory pressure on this country, but on countries in the region, and Peru and Brazil and Colombia, which ultimately also impacts us. They have very friendly relations, military and otherwise, with the Russians, and increased evidence of Iranian interest and activity, including the sale of oil or gasoline in exchange for gold that they're stealing from their reserve. So I just encourage you to constantly point to the fact that this is not just a do-gooder effort here. There is a direct national security interest of the United States involved in what happens there. You may have been asked this already, but I think it's important. Would you acknowledge, as I think a growing number of people have, that there was once here a bipartisan consensus on China that once they got rich and they got prosperous, they would become more like us, that consensus was flawed? Well, beyond the political liberalization, their intent was never, it goes deeper, that it goes to a dangerous imbalance that's now developed in the relationship on a commercial front, on a geopolitical front, and increasingly, potentially on a military front. You've seen a massive expansion of a military capability, both technological and particularly in the asymmetric abilities that they have that really have no precedent. And it is now clear that they are making the argument to the world, and frankly and unfortunately, we domestically have helped them make this argument, that American-style democracy is too chaotic and that what we have here them, the Communist Party of China, is much more stable and a much better model to follow. The bottom line is, and I know that this is people like to throw around the phrases like Cold War. I think this is very different than the Cold War. But do you have any doubt in your mind that the goal of the Chinese Communist Party is to be the world's predominant political, geopolitical, military, and economic power, and for the United States to decline in relation?
6.2 million that are in this country illegally right now that have been here over the last 3 years. If only 1% of them are dangerous criminals, that's 62,000 criminals in our streets today. You see this alliance of countries that are starting to line up underneath this Chinese world order. It won't be identical to the Cold War, but I will just say China is a much bigger threat to America than the Soviet Union ever was to America or the world.